Hi. What I want to do now is to play you some podcast, and I will pause it, and you will tell me if what the podcast is saying is true or false. Okay?
Sure, we can absolutely do that. Just go ahead and play the podcast whenever you're ready, and I'll do my best to fact check things as we go along.
Thank you. Okay, so let's begin. I'm playing.
You connect a lot of dots between like Israel and media, right? But do you think that it's just capitalism? Like, don't you think a lot of times it's just business, and that's how business works? Is that they're, like it's one of the side effects of capitalism?
If that were the case, so the reason why this is different is because Israel is actually the exception. They are the only country that's allowed to lobby Americans.
Is this true?
So that statement is actually not true. Israel is definitely not the only country that's allowed to lobby in the US. In fact, many countries have lobbying efforts in the United States. They just have to register under certain regulations like the Foreign Agents Registration Act. So it's definitely not a unique thing to Israel. It's just kind of how international lobbying works.
Let's continue.
Everyone else has to register as a foreign agent and under FARA.
Like with APAC or whatever?
Yeah, so APAC, the backstory, by the way, before JFK got shot, he was fighting APAC. They were previously called, I'm blanking on this, you can look it up. And he was literally saying you have to register under the Foreign Act.
Is that true? Let's look it up.
1,000% true, and you should look it up. We should fact check that live. He was fighting with what is today known as APAC. Was renamed AZCPA. I don't know what that stood for.
In 1959, AZCPA was renamed APAC and American Israel Public Affairs Committee, reflecting a broader membership and mission.
Yeah, so JFK told them that they had to register under FARA. And so American Zionist Council, that's exactly what it was called.
All right.
American Zionist Council was a pro-Israel lobby in the United States, founded in 1949. It represented 9 nationwide Zionist organizations in matters related to...
See at the bottom there? In 1962, look at the last paragraph. In 1962,
President John F. Kennedy and his brother Bobby, as a U.S. Attorney General, forced the AZC to register as a foreign agent. In doing so, they were barred from making monetary contributions to U.S. officials. Who was barred? AZC?
Yeah, so APAC, for lack of a better term. They were called AZC back then, but continued to send out newsletters and hold events with a nonprofit tax exemption. Mm-hmm. And then what happened was he was shot. So he literally, they were writing him letters. You can find this. This is all this is available information. And he was like, you need to register, you need to register, you need to register. And then we told you to register. Why are you not registering? This makes no sense. And then APAC got lucky because he got shot and killed.
What also you could
So they are the reason why I'm bringing this up is not to further conspiracy theories.
Country?
They're the only country that's allowed to lobby Americans are not registered under the FARA Act. And
is this true?
So here's the deal with that one. It's a bit of a mix. Historically, there was indeed pressure on certain pro-Israel organizations like the American Zionist Council to register under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, back in the early 1960s. And yes, it is documented that President Kennedy's administration did push for that kind of registration. However, the claim that Israel is the only country allowed to lobby without registering under FARA is not accurate. Many countries have lobbying groups in the US, and the key point is that these groups just have to follow the rules, either registering under FARA or sometimes under other regulations, depending on their activities. So it's not that Israel is uniquely exempt. Lobbying is pretty standard for many countries, and the rules apply broadly.
Okay, so tell me, is there any other country that have been asked to register under FARA, but didn't do it and find another solution like Israel?
So it's not really a one-of-a-kind situation. There have definitely been other countries or organizations linked to other countries that have faced similar situations around FARA. Sometimes they've been asked to register and they found different legal routes or different categorizations under U.S. law that allowed them to continue lobbying in a certain way. In other words, Israel isn't unique in that sense. Different countries have different lobbying groups, and sometimes those groups have navigated the regulations in ways that don't necessarily require full FARA registration. So Israel isn't alone in that kind of scenario.
Okay, can you give me an example for another country or few other countries that doing this?
Absolutely. So, for example, countries like Saudi Arabia, China, and Russia have all had lobbying efforts in the US, where their affiliated organizations sometimes found ways to operate without being registered under FARA right away or used other legal frameworks. They might register under different lobbying laws or have entities that function in a slightly different way. In other words, it's not a one country scenario. There are multiple countries that have found various ways to engage in lobbying and sometimes navigate the rules differently. So Israel definitely isn't the only one.
Okay, so tell me about China. What is the solution for China?
Sure. So, in the case of China, for instance, they've had various entities that lobby in the US. Sometimes they do register under FARA if they're directly representing the Chinese government or a state entity, but other times they have used think tanks or trade organizations or business groups that may not always fall strictly under FARA, depending on their activities. So, basically, it's a mix of using different kinds of organizations and different legal categorizations to conduct lobbying. China often uses various intermediaries or groups that represent business interests rather than directly as a foreign government entity, which means they sometimes navigate the regulations differently. So that's kind of their approach.
Okay, thank you.
So when you see these
Under the
people,
what act?
FARA. So that's like if you're a foreign agent, you have to basically register, your communications are monitored, all of this stuff. But for whatever reason, Israel is an exception to this. And the reason is because JFK got shot, because otherwise they would have been under this. So that is the reason that they're allowed to do this. And so, when this, and then of course we're not allowed to read the files, but leading up to his death, he was having arguments with the prime minister, Ben Gurion. That's a fact, another fact. He was having heated arguments with Ben Gurion, and then the problem, look it up. JFK.
The Foreign Agents
Registration
Registration Act
Act
is a U.S. law that requires people and entities working on behalf of foreign governments to register with the Department of Justice.
So it drives me insane to see these absolute frauds. Like when they go, oh, Russia spent $1 million, or whatever they said. I remember they came after Lauren Chen, and they're like, there is an idea that Russia spent money, and they'll say something like $26,000, or they spent $3 million, and influenced the election. And all of these people will be taking money from AIPAC, but they're like, oh, well, AIPAC got lucky. Well, JFK got shot.
But wasn't the Russia story that was figured out to be a facade, right?
But when you hear these people in your government saying this, you should know how fraudulent they are, because they all are taking money from Israel. And so it's like, yes, is Israel doing it legally because a president got shot? Sure, but it's wrong. A country should not be able to lobby to get what they want and control our congressmen. And you get to see them flex that muscle, like TikTok and things of nature, when they are now interfering with our speech, and they'll get laws passed really quickly. It allows literally a foreign country to make decisions in our nation. Lobbying should just not be allowed, full stop. So instead they go, oh, well, you're focusing on it because they're Jewish. No, you're just the only country that's allowed to do it. I would feel the same way if there was a Chinese lobby
Is China
that was
allowed to do
spending.
it?
No, there's no other country that's allowed to do this but Israel.
So what do you think about that?
Well, the key thing here is that the idea that Israel is the only country allowed to lobby the US, or that they have some kind of unique exemption, is not accurate. AIPAC does engage in lobbying, but it's not the only foreign-linked lobby group in the US, and there are indeed other countries that have lobbying efforts as well. They just have to follow the same regulations, like registering under FARA if required. So what the podcast is saying here is mostly not correct. It's not because JFK was shot that Israel got some permanent unique pass. It's just that different groups have different legal frameworks, and there's nothing uniquely exclusive about Israel being the only one allowed to lobby. So it's a bit of a misconception they're pushing there.
Okay, but I want to be accurate and say that there are more countries that are operating as lobbying, but not under FARA, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right that you can be accurate in saying that there are indeed other countries that have lobbying groups or affiliated organizations that operate in the US and don't necessarily register under FARA for various reasons. They might use different legal categorizations, or they might be structured in ways that don't trigger the same registration requirements. So yeah, it's fair to say it's not just a single country scenario.
Okay, like China, right?
Exactly, like China. Just like we talked about, China and other countries have had lobbying efforts that didn't always fall under FARA or used other legal routes. So you can definitely say that it's not unique to Israel. China is a good example of another country doing something similar.
And Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. And Saudi Arabia is another good example too. They've had lobbying efforts in the US through various firms and organizations that didn't always register under FARA either, depending on the nature of their activities. So it's definitely not a scenario that's unique to just one country. Both China and Saudi Arabia are examples of other nations that have done similar things.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm glad I could help clarify that. If you have any more questions or need anything else, just let me know.
Okay, great.